going to share my screen with the meeting, and I should still have my slides up here. I do. That's fabulous. Okay. Well, I'll get these intake sheets from you all as you go today, but let's get started. So we've already talked a little bit about what some of the things are that might bring us in. The bishop said I had to do it, or completing a process that started a long time ago, or I've come to another place in my life where I was looking for something different. Other reasons, other compelling answers to the question of what may have brought you here today. Well, that's fine. We've named them, so we'll just move on. And then I've talked about how to handle the questions you bring with you. So there are some outcomes of this process, and one, as I've mentioned before, is just the chance to do your own enrichment and learn about this, and that's again a no pressure situation. The other is you may wish to move a membership from another Episcopal congregation, as was mentioned, and we can, I think we've already actually handled that, haven't we? Okay, we've at least started the process, yeah, okay. So that's a simple transfer. There are three kinds of official ways, though, to come into the church as a member. And the first one is known as confirmation. And you may hear me say confirmation, and I'm probably, in my mind, just referring to this whole process. If you're here to be received or reaffirmed, that's okay. Just know that that's just my own kind of forgetful shorthand. But confirmation is the mature public affirmation of your faith. And that is celebrated by your peers, and the bishop comes in and sits in the bishop's chair and lays her hands on your head and offers you the blessing of the church as a confirmed member. If you were baptized as a child, but you never went through confirmation, this is the one that's for you. The second is what is called reception, and that's for those who have been baptized and confirmed in a denomination that has a ritual of confirmation. So that's going to be like Methodist, Catholics, or Lutherans. Although I put such as Methodists because we're never quite sure if we're ready for complete union between the Episcopalians and the Methodists. So at this point, this last General Convention was going to be the one where we decided that if you were confirmed in the Methodist Church, that was good enough to count as confirmation in the Episcopal Church, and we didn't quite get to that process. The Methodists are having some of the same infighting as the Episcopalians had back in the early 2000s. So I would shorten this list for now: Catholic or Lutheran. Others we can talk about. And then reaffirmation of faith is for anybody who's been baptized already and confirmed in the Episcopal Church. Perhaps this has happened in a church other than Grace Cathedral. So, for example, to recognize Robert's membership at St. David's, we would ask you to go through a process like this and then be reaffirmed by the bishop. And that's, instead of putting her hands on you, she'll reach out and grab your hand and say words of reception. This whole thing is you are part of something that is broadly referred to quite often as the Anglican Communion. I think of that as kind of like the entire family tree. But really, of course, it's just a branch of the Christian faith. But for those of us who live on that branch, it feels like its own tree sometimes. The Anglican Communion is it's a mainline Christian denomination. Mainline is a term of art, but it essentially means your kind of larger denominations, your Lutherans, Presbyterians, Methodists, Episcopalians. So, and you can find the Anglican Communion worldwide in 160 different countries. Member churches are what we call in communion. So when I say a member church, I mean, for example, in this country, it's called, the Anglican Communion is called the Episcopal Church. So I'll just pick one. The church in Singapore is, it's either the Anglican Church of Singapore or the Episcopal Church of Singapore. Actually, I think it's an expression of the Episcopal Church in this country. But when we say that we're in communion, what that means is that we recognize one another's existence, and that the existence of those two member bodies is recognized by a third party. In this case, the gentleman on the screen behind me, Justin Welby, is the current Archbishop of Canterbury, a post that has been around for a very long time. As you see up there, he is the 105th Archbishop of Canterbury. Membership is divided up into provinces. So we have 160 countries, 41 provinces, and about 70 million people around the world. The things that hold us together and that define us are very strong characteristics. And so, for example, I went to the Episcopal Church in far southwestern Sudan for 10 or 11 days several years ago, and felt very much at home in some ways in terms of the ritual, and like I knew exactly where we were in the services, even though I had no idea what was being said. So the rhythm is there. The image that you see on the right is called the compass rose. That is the sort of the logo for the Anglican Communion. When we talk about bishops, and we'll talk about bishops quite a bit because we are overseen by bishops. First Timothy talks about overseers, and it is that language of to look around, to have oversight, that we borrow from episkopos, epi, around, and skopos, I think, to look around, to see. And in the Episcopal Church, when I mean the Episcopal Church, I mean in this country, those people are elected. So we have Bishop Kathleen here, for example, whose office is just right over here, and was elected a few years ago. And it takes a while to learn how to drive a ship this large and complicated, but she's been doing great and has been learning the ropes as a new bishop, and we've really enjoyed her leadership here. I'll talk in a little bit about the relationship between the cathedral and the bishop, which is different and a little bit special. In other parts of the world, bishops can be appointed. So you might find someone who has been elevated to that post, and then you say, oh, that's interesting, because in our diocese, we had an election. But in other places, in fact, a person can just be simply put in that position. They have significant authority, and they have significant involvement in the day-to-day affairs of the diocese. And I'm going to break down what I mean by diocese in just a minute. I'd say less authority than Roman Catholic bishops, more authority than Methodist or Lutheran bishops, but just as much involvement as any of those, and could by their authority could come into a church and close it, could not immediately dissolve the relationship between the priest and the congregation. That would take a little more process. But when our bishop comes, for her official visit, we lay everything out for her, all of our books, our services, and everything else. We ask her to sign off, showing that she's seen it all. No one else and no other bishop could come in to this diocese and do the things that bishops are charged with doing, ordinations or things like that, without the explicit permission of our bishop. And so a few years ago, when the bishop that we had, Dean Wolfe, announced that he was going to resign and become the rector of St. Bartholomew's, or St. Bart's in New York City, that caused a significant amount of change as we anticipated the next bishop, wrote a profile for that person, held an election, and then finally had a consecration. By the way, a lot of that happened in our cathedral. The bishop is the chief administrator and the chief pastor. And as a part of our, how we're made and how we govern ourselves, the word I will use for that is polity. As in our polity, the bishops are gathered in what is called the House of Bishops. And talk a little bit more about that in a second. If you're not in the House of Bishops, but you're a part of the governance of the whole church, you're in the House of Deputies. So we have a bicameral legislature. Isn't this stuff just totally exciting? I can tell you're just riveted by this. This, by the way, this is my friend Nick. He's the bishop of the Diocese of Rhode Island. Not surprisingly, the smallest, I believe, diocese within the Episcopal Church, and a fabulous guy. Smaller than Western Kansas, yeah, quite a bit. You can drive across it in 45 minutes. Numbers of congregations, oh, I see. A few years ago, we weathered some storms around human sexuality issues, who could be ordained, who could be married, who could become a bishop. And in the process of coming to clarity with ourselves about that, there were significant questions of authority. And so there was a question, what holds us together as Anglicans? There were kind of four answers that came up, and these have come to be known as the instruments of communion. And so the first is, as you've seen already, with a photo of Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. That's the first one. So the Archbishop of Canterbury has spiritual authority over the communion, but unlike say a pope or a metropolitan, can't tell us how to conduct our affairs necessarily. Can encourage us to do certain things. Actually did come to one of our general conventions a few years ago and encourage us to take a specific course of action, and we voted overwhelmingly not to do that. So that just shows you where we recognize that we have our own authority here. The Lambeth Conference is the second one, and this is the meeting of every bishop in the entire Anglican Communion. And that's what this photo is. So you see anything thematically that looks kind of similar about the people in these photos? They're all dudes. They're all dudes. This has changed. I mean, we don't get to do this very often. We have these meetings once a decade. But the next one is this month. All of the bishops in the Anglican Communion have been invited to attend, and they're all in the process of, if you read their Facebook pages, they're all in the process of getting on the plane right now to go to Lambeth for this once every decade meeting. Just for fun, I pulled this photo from the General Convention, which just happened. And this is one of the tables in the House of Bishops. It is changing, it is becoming much more diverse. And so that photo is going to look different this time. What? It's held at Lambeth Palace in England. Yeah. And then there is the primates meeting. In a moment, I'll show you a photo of Michael Curry. You probably saw him preach at the royal wedding a few years ago on the power of love. So he is our canons, the rules for how we govern ourselves state that the presiding bishop, which I will tell you about, is also the primate of the province. So we have a province and a presiding bishop. So the primates meeting is all of the heads, spiritual heads of the provinces. And then finally, there is what is called the Anglican Consultative Council. It is billed as the most representative body of gathered Anglicans among these instruments. So it's not just about bishops, it's about lay persons, it's about deacons, it's about priests, it's about bishops and archbishops. And really, in my way of seeing all of this, congregations need pastors, sure, and pastors need shepherds. Yes, I agree. But for my money, this is really about the ministry of empowered lay persons. So if this process that we're going through doesn't eventually take you to a place where you have a chance to think about your own ministry, then I will have missed the boat. So it is important to have the entire suite of leaders. And in fact, our prayer book has a catechism that asks, who are the ministers of the church? And the first answer in the list is lay persons. That's a very intentional inclusion. So they're there again. So that was the world. What if we just narrow in our scope just a little bit and think about this country? The branch is again called the Episcopal Church. It is again the Anglican Communion and the expression of the Anglican Communion in the United States and a few other places. The reason I'm saying it's the expression of is because it seems like every time we go through, whether a storm related to some hot topic or other, we end up developing a branch that kind of moves away from some of the others. If you've been a Lutheran, if you've been a Methodist, if you spend any time in the church, you see this all the time. Episcopalians have not lost too many through this, although there was one kind of section of time not that long ago where the controversy was at its hottest point. This was over whether a partnered gay person could be the Bishop of New Hampshire. He'd been duly elected and was ready to serve, and it created quite a controversy at the time. That was 2003. And in an organized moment, a lot of people, about 50,000 people, left the church. And that was very painful for us, but it also clarified who and what we are and where our commitments are. So those have names like Anglican Communion of North America, things like that. We call them Cana and Acna. But Episcopalians, by and large, are the largest of this. We do, again, govern ourselves independently from the remainder of the Anglican Communion. We have constitution and canons. Any organization you've been a part of probably had a constitution or bylaws, right? So this is similar to how we organize ourselves. We just went through a general convention at which we revised some of those canons and rules for the Rhode, for how we're going to organize ourselves. And then it's every priest's job, with the help of the diocese, to actually then sit down and find out what changes were made. We have the general convention, which runs the church every 3 years. So we just had this. I just came back from this event. It was held in Baltimore. These are normally 10-day events that was shortened to 4 days, and we did the most essential business that we could during that time. Some things got referred to the next General Convention. Some things just said, we're not going to take any action on that at this time, and bring it back in 3 more years. We have about 1.6 million members in the United States. And then when you look at the rest of where the Episcopal Church is, it's in Europe, it's in Guam, Solomon Islands, and Fiji, and Singapore, and other places like that. Altogether, that's about 1.8 million members. And we have units that we divide ourselves up into called dioceses. Some people say diocese. I think that's chickening out. I think you should just say dioceses and have someone not understand what you're saying. But that's more than one. We're at the Episcopal Diocese of Kansas. So there are 111 of these in the Episcopal Church. We just 3 years ago we added Cuba. It was a great celebration. They had been, of course, you know, during the time of the Obama administration, we had more gates kind of open up between Cuba and the United States, and as if in fulfillment of some of those promises, they were able to come back in to that fold. It was a great moment. And each bishop or each diocese has a bishop, but some have more than one, but only one bishop in each diocese has the kind of power that we've been talking about. You can have assisting bishops. You can have what are called suffragan. These are people who serve in different capacities, and they're ordained to do what bishops do, but one person holds the most authority in each one. And there's Michael Curry, our friend and the 27th presiding bishop. He's very friendly. He got off the elevator and he accosted those of us from Kansas the other week. He's about that tall, and he's just a real powerhouse. He's got this backpack on, and and so he's kind of throwing his weight around, and you just love the guy. He is, I think, in my time in the Episcopal Church, been by far the most visible, vocal person, willing to speak out on important issues as they have come down the pike. And so we've been very grateful for his leadership. So this was, until a few weeks ago, actually, was a representative map of all the dioceses of the Episcopal Church. Things aren't exactly divided up by states, are they? So you can see we have, in our state, we have 2. The more populous kind of 1/3 of the state, and then the less populous, but much more wide-ranging western 2/3 of the state. Our diocese, as I'll show you in a moment, includes, let's see, Galena in the southeast, all the way up to Abilene, and Blue Rapids, and Marysville in the northwest, down to Wichita and Wellington in the southwest, and then if you go all the way up into the furthest corner, you get Leavenworth and Atchison. And so it includes Kansas City, Lawrence, Topeka, and Wichita, by far the most populous centers of the diocese. You'll also see a circle starting maybe around the southwest corner of the state of Colorado. This is the Diocese of the Navajo land, special area for indigenous persons. They just went through a process to elect their own bishop, which we approved at the General Convention. It's really a great moment. Some places are intact, like Colorado, like Nevada, but if you look at places that are just absolutely unmanageably large, California, Texas, and so on, Florida, but then you have Alaska going, what's the problem, guys? Well, of course, Alaska has, I think, like 9 full-time priests, something like that. So If you look down at Texas, you'll see there are 5 dioceses. Dioceses, right? And we just approved a couple of weeks ago the merger. Oops, is that not in there? Yeah, the merger of the diocese in the blue area now is the Diocese of Texas. It's that whole thing. It was the Diocese of Dallas. You can see it broken up on this previous picture. And so this is called reunion, and it's a wonderful thing when it happens. The Diocese of Texas sold the hospital system, and they got about $1 billion out of it. And they said, well, we need to be good stewards of this. We need to increase our resource base among wherever the need happens to be. And we would love to be in conversation with new partners or old partners. And so this reunion was one of the things that has come out of the last few years. It's been big news for them. Within our diocese, you can see it marked there in brown on the lower left image. And then next to the image of that is Bishop Kathleen, our bishop. Has everybody had a chance to meet Bishop Kathleen kind of at this point? She's in this room a lot for different things that we have. She's been very invested in the transformation of this campus, the part of the land that they own, which is sort of everything from the concrete down south to the school, and the garden project that's going in. So she's, in fact, loved to be had her photo taken with the, sitting in her garden over there. When you come down Polk Street, you'll see the south end of the cathedral. There's a little wall, runs about 15 feet, and then it turns, and there's a wooden door there. That's the bishop's private garden space. She goes out there to pray quite a bit. So that's a cozy spot for her. I don't think she's always dressed in purple like that, but when you see purple, that's kind of a signal that you might be dealing with a bishop. The deacons of the diocese were recently told that we don't care what color shirt you wear as long as it's not purple. We don't want to get confused here. So we have in the Diocese of Kansas about 8,500 members in 44 congregations. When I was the canon to the ordinary, when I worked for the bishop's office, it was my responsibility and joy to go to each one of those congregations and learn about them and their ministries and offer them help with various issues that they had. And I can tell you, they are as varied as the people, towns, textures, politics, and characteristics of each one of the communities that they are to be found in. So when you go to any of these places, especially on a Sunday morning, check it out. There's a lot going on in them. And we also have what are called Minsters. Actually, I wrote, we have 11 Minsters. We actually have 10 now, and convocations. Convocations, these are just convenient geographic ways of splitting us up. We're in the northwestern convocation, those of us from this part of the diocese, and we're in what's called the Tallgrass Minster. In a few weeks, I'll have Casey come in and introduce herself. She's the Minster Shepherd for the Tallgrass Minster. Bishops have the title Right Reverend, the Right Reverend. So if you write a letter to a bishop, you can put the Right Reverend on the outside. But probably when you say dear, you can just say Dear Bishop Bascom or Dear Bishop Smith. And then for us, the word cathedral comes from the word for seat or chair. It reflects the distinctive role that is played by this congregation. Not every diocese has a cathedral, but this one does. It's acknowledged in our kind of primitive documents that Grace Cathedral will be the seat of the bishop. And we tend to put a lot of stock in our furniture. If you go in there, you'll see where her seat is. It's very clear. Go in and look at the altar, and on your right, you'll see the dean's chair, and then on your left, you'll see the symbol of the diocese, and that's the bishop's seat. So we always maintain that. Whenever she's here, that's where she sits. And then we have a special chair, the bishop's chair, that we bring out to the front for her to sit in, to be seated in at diocesan events, at ordinations, at the diocesan convention. And especially for you all, when we have our confirmations, you'll see that's the seat that she's sitting in when the lessons are being read. We have recently cleaned the books a little bit. We had 700 and some communicants in good standing. That's not true. That hadn't been true for a while. So we looked at who do we really have and found out that if everybody who fits the definition of active were here on a Sunday, we would have just under 400 people in the room. It's probably not uncommon for churches to have a total roll. I'm sure do you all have a similar thing? A total roll, and then you actually have the people that you see on a regular basis. And that number is called average Sunday attendance. So before COVID, it was around 250. We are still finding our strength in this. We are, last year, the average was about half of that. For this year, we're on track to do that. And every time we loosen a COVID restriction, but we do it very carefully, we do see more people return to the church. We've also had people who found us on the computer during COVID. They deliberately looked at services and sermons to see what they thought and have decided that they want to join us. And there are some people that you will meet over the course of this time who have been exactly through that process. So we're excited about welcoming them. You will notice that we have red doors, and a lot of Episcopal congregations have red doors, actually. It's thought to symbolize the blood of Christ, but red is also a color of refuge and escape and a sanctuary. And so cathedrals have been associated around the world for a long time with the idea of sanctuary, where sometimes you could even, you would need a place to actually retreat to so that you would not be taken away by the authorities, and you could find actual sanctuary within the walls of that cathedral. So over the course of these next weeks, we'll be talking about a number of things. Anglican beliefs, you'll find there's a lot of room for a lot of different interpretations. That's one of the fundamental ideas that distinguishes Anglican beliefs. But there are certain creeds, there are certain things that you find at the heart of it that for me at least, are unchanging identity markers. If we don't place Jesus at the center of our faith and worship, for example, then I'm not sure quite what it is that we're doing. How that translates then into practices, and how that shapes our liturgy. And then we'll have a chance also in turn to think about how our liturgy shapes us, how it shapes how we think, how we believe, and how we want to live out our Christian vocation in the world. Certain customs that are good, maybe some that we're holding on to that we may need to look at. Ways of devotion that we can participate in, not just on Sundays, but throughout the day, every day. We'll talk about how Episcopalians and Anglicans think about the Bible, various interpretations of what Scripture does and how it's supposed to inform us and change us and shape us for service in the world. And then we'll spend some time looking at our prayer book as well. it is not like we have a prayer book that replaces Scripture, although some think that that's the case. That is not the case. We certainly hold these things together. So I would like for you to do something for me. I would like to make sure that when you leave here today, if you do not have a Book of Common Prayer at home, a tangible, actual, holdable, turn the pageable Book of Common Prayer, that you have one when you leave here today. Because I want you to have the experience of touching every single page of the Book of Common Prayer. And I want you to this isn't, right? This isn't going through the phone book. It's actually just turning the page deliberately and seeing what you see, allowing your curiosity to let you stop. So, what is that? Where did that come from? I have questions about that. I'm going to write this down. I'm going to dog-ear this page. I'm going to bring this in and ask the group about it. I want to know what Father Torrey thinks about this. Touch every page of the Book of Common Prayer. See what's in it. Learn a little bit about how people are praying with it. And also, when you come back, I will have a cool thing for you. We have 20 copies that we've purchased of a book from Forward Movement called Walk in Love. And you will find this to be a nice resource and companion for you along the way. I'm going to leave a lot of blanks in my presentations. This will help you to fill in the blanks and will help you to make more sense of the Episcopal Church, the Anglican Communion, our theological basis for things, and that kind of the who, where, why, and what, of why we do what we do. So I think that's the end of my formal presentation now, but we have just a few minutes before we need to go. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts today based on what you've heard or that you're kind of burning up with? The other diocese in Kansas is called the Diocese of Western Kansas. They can't share the name. Of course, it used to be one whole diocese. And there are proceedings from prior diocesan conventions where the bishop is saying, and at one point used to extend out into the plains of Colorado. You could see the Front Range from it. So you hear these bishops saying, once again, I failed to get out to all of our congregations this year. I mean, it was unmanageably large, right? So at least with statehood, then we had one uniform approach to it, but then of course over time that became split up. And the reunion thing that I mentioned in Texas, I do that on purpose because perhaps at some point that is a conversation that we might want to think about taking up in this diocese. Mm-hmm. Yes, the priest who has charge of the cathedral congregation is called the dean. Yeah, it's stupidly confusing sometimes. Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. So father is the colloquial term for a priest. You could say father or mother. So that's the Reverend David Jenkins. He's a priest of the church. Whether you're a priest or a deacon, your title is the Reverend, courtesy title. But a priest would often be referred to as father or mother. And then there are other specialized terms, like for the dean of the cathedral, my title is the Very Reverend, which I think is just a stitch because it ain't true, but oh well. Here we are. Well, it means I'm the priest with charge of this congregation. Top boss probably, is on the payroll, but You find lots of interesting titles. Deacon Ann also is what's called one of the two archdeacons of the diocese. And when you're an archdeacon, your title is the Venerable so-and-so. So it goes on and on. I can assure you there's an entire style guide for this. Other thoughts or questions?
When you talked about the two types of confirmation, reception, or
Reaffirmation.
reaffirmation. So the reception wouldn't be confirmed if you were baptized previously.
Baptized and confirmed, but in which tradition? Yeah, that works.
That works.
Yeah. So we would say, okay, we have this many people today, Bishop Kathleen, for confirmation, this many for reception, this many for reaffirmation. And we'll get to all of this. Yeah. So great. Well, if that's it, my goodness gracious. Have you heard anything that, I know this is sort of a dry, dusty lecture, but have you heard anything that you want to know a little bit more about, or that raised your hackles? We just want to know more, willing to come back again next week?
No.
Promise I'll get to it. Yeah, it's a beautiful history lesson. It's involved in that. Yeah. And Chris is a history teacher, so at some point I may say, am I getting this even in the ballpark? And then you can help me.
So does that mean Westminster Abbey?
You would say Church of England.
That's what
It's all within the Anglican Communion. But yeah, everything starts in England. Yeah, we'll definitely get to that, because that history is completely fascinating. Yeah, but it's great. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Mike can confirm. I was really stuck for a while. What are we supposed to call? Everybody's a pastor. So it's important.
Yeah. And I grew up in the Southern Baptist tradition, and everybody there was brother so-and-so. Of course, they didn't have female pastors, so it's brother so-and-so. So that's the first hurdle, which was, I also spent time in the Assembly of God tradition, watching my grandmother's female pastor work these Southern Kansas farms, and she was the best pastor I've ever seen. So you couldn't tell from jump, you couldn't tell me that women couldn't be pastors. But so in our tradition, you might say Father Tory, you could say Dean Tory. I like kids to know that these titles exist. So like if there are kids present, you might say Dean Lightcap. But there's no reason to bow and scrape and kiss the ring. That's just not kind of baked in to my tradition. I'd rather kind of come at it from a little bit more collegial standpoint. So you could say Dean Tory or Father Tory. Either one of those would be fine. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming today. Appreciate your time. I can get you one right now. Does anybody else need one?
One last question.
Yeah.
We're not being able to do that.
Okay. Oh, good.
You want to give us information on?
Okay. So first of all, let's see. Does everybody get the eChimes newsletter? Pardon me, you're getting it. Okay. So by hook or by crook, we're going to make sure that our communications are including access to links where people can go and watch these presentations, what I'm recording right now, after the fact. So you'll be able to and I'll make sure that I include you all in an email where you'll be able to go and watch those, but it won't be live. It'll be a little bit after the fact. Does anybody else need a Book of Common Prayer to take home? So 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, great. All right. Thanks for being here today. Please come back next time.